and we are live with our 217th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on X. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone. Also at Seth Law on Mastodon, infosec.exchange, I think it is. I can't remember, right? Nowadays the socials are all over the place. But welcome back to another episode. We're super excited to have Shlomi back on the show this afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it is for whoever is listening that's out there. Just a couple of announcements as we run into it. If you are going to be at Texas Cyber Summit, we'd love to, have you participate in the pre-conference training with us for practical secure code review. We've got some updates that we're pushing through the course related to all of the discussions around machine learning and LLMs and new stuff that we have been experimenting with. Just ways to speed up the secure code review process. Some of the manual things are getting easier just based on the tools that are available. So if you're going to be there, consider us for that. Or the other opportunity is, again, the DEF CON training in the Seattle area later in the year. I think it's November 1st and 2nd up in Seattle or in Bellevue. I'll post that link here shortly as well. And let me think, what else? Ken, do we want to jump into the CTF for next week as well?
Yeah, we should mention that. I do have a sign-up link that we can share. And we both have this link that we can share here, which I will do in a moment, or we can both do. Anyways, so next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we're hosting a challenge with SecDim. So we're going to kind of walk through how to use that platform. And then we're going to show you kind of like, essentially, we're going to go through the process of doing the CTF alongside you viewers. So if you're kind of newer to it, that might be helpful to you. If you're maybe more advanced, maybe you'll just hop on over to the actual challenges and get it going. We're gonna we'll talk about all the swag and the prizes and all of that in more detail. So more information to come, but essentially, if you have time next week, spend a couple hours with us doing this challenge, and then the challenge should run for a few days after that too. So it's not like you have to do it just within the 2 hours. It is a both find the vulnerability and once you've found the vulnerability, fix the vulnerability as well type of CTF. We have a plethora of languages. I'm not going to tell you all of them. There's some interesting ones. There's some interesting, not just languages, but also technology stacks that, you're going to get a chance to play with. It's really cool. I'm excited about it. So, and I know Seth is as well. So that's, let me get this link going for folks.
Yeah, drop the link in there. The interesting there with the SecDim platform, and we had Pedram on a few weeks ago, talking about SecDim and security training for developers and security people, security engineers in general. But the interesting thing there is that Ken and I at a previous company actually built a platform that was very similar ideas about finding and fixing vulnerabilities in code and then posting it back up using GitHub and Actions and everything like that. But it wasn't as refined as what we're seeing with SecDim. So we're excited to actually exercise that and play with it, see how it's been implemented and how the team over at SecDim is doing something that is fairly effective in learning how to deal with these vulnerabilities, especially with very specific frameworks and languages. So join us next week. That'll be the 13th of September, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. And it'll run for at least, I think we're going to run it for at least a week before we do announce prizes and everything else. And we may release challenges as we go, depending on how people do within the event. Cool. All right. Well, with that, again, we're going to introduce Shlomi and get into security tools and what you're seeing in the industry. Shlomi worked with Ken at GitHub in a previous life, right? And yeah, for those of you that don't remember or didn't listen to the previous the previous episode with Shlomi. Shlomi, do you just want to introduce yourself really quick, what you're doing over at GitHub, and then we'll launch into it from there?
Yeah, 100%. And we were just talking about it, I think, a little bit earlier, but I can't believe it's been, like it's only been March. To me, it felt like it was almost a year ago since we spoke. And so I'm Shlomi. I lead the application security business unit in Asia Pacific, and I've been with GitHub for about 2 years. But before that, I've been with HP or Fortify, actually, before even the acquisition, for about almost 7 years. And so it was really interesting for me personally to see kind of like where the industry was around 2009, 2010 was really early days, at least in Asia Pacific. I think even in the US, when I was following, a lot of customers were just on the kind of the early journey of application security. And now I think there's a lot more interest and focus on it. But it's funny because some of the challenges are exactly the same. It's the same things that we dealt with 10 years ago seem to be haunting us still.
Yeah. So along those lines, what are those challenges that you're seeing? I have a talk that I have been giving. I've given a couple times recently, which is like this idea of old school vulnerabilities, like how they manifest nowadays and what I've seen over my career. So I'm interested to see what the challenges are that you have seen from Fortify days that you're still seeing now.
I think,
just an example.
Yeah. So I think in general, kind of like it's the same challenges. Some of them have shifted a little bit, like the maturity kind of like have shifted a little bit. So I'm seeing if about 10 or even 13 years ago, you would see very little customers that kind of were thinking about creating a security gate or even empowering the engineering team to actually do their own security. Now it's a lot more common. So a lot more people are thinking, whatever the buzzword is, shift left, etc., about how to do it. So it's encouraging to see that a lot more people are actually looking at it. But the challenges are still, I think, very fundamental, where if you think about it, engineers have really one goal, which is, I guess, to deliver features and functions on time, on budget, like the best features. They want to get the best out there, and they want to do it in a fast way. And then security obviously want the same thing, but they want to keep it safe. And so they kind of have to slow down. And so it's always, you need to, I think a lot of organizations are trying to find how to balance between going really fast, but doing it in a safe way. And that is always going to be a challenge. I mean, from a goal perspective. So that's, I think, one thing. The other thing is, I think, just knowledge. Like, how do you scale application security knowledge across all the engineering team? And it's okay if you have a static engineering team that have 100 developers and they're there for 3 years. Great, you can train them, but that's not the case. A lot of people are coming, they're going, you're using external parties. And so often I think a lot of customers are struggling with, training that they did. I think I can't stress how important it is to do security awareness and training, but often a lot of people are finding it really hard to scale it and do it in a way that is consistent, that is, I guess, effective, because the people are just coming and going. And so how do you make sure that those people know what they should be doing? And I think generally I've seen engineers definitely want to do the right thing. Like if you allow them to do it in an easy way, they'll do it. But a lot of times we just, add up a lot of friction, a lot of processes that are unnecessary. And then I think I said it last time, whether you apply, it's funny, it's like that applies to anything in security, to be honest. If you put too many controls that are too restrictive, people will find a way around it. People are kind of like water, that they'll find a way around it. And so whether it's DLP, where you're trying to block everything coming out of your machines, they're going to find a way. I mean, if you think about it, like a pen and paper is the easiest way to circumvent DLP. And yet we're trying to complicate things. And so I think we just need to change a bit of the mindset around security, to trust people that they are going to do the right thing, but give them a way to do it in an easy way. So that's unrelated to tools, and there's some challenges around, I guess, tools, but we can get to that a bit later as well.
Yeah, I mean, in general, and I do think we spent some time discussing kind of the security versus engineering battles, quote unquote, or antagonism that exists, just from a speed of delivery versus securing of assets as they go out the door last time around, right? I don't think it gets any better. Yeah, I mean, the more tools that we introduce, and like, I'm not sure what you're seeing as you implement some of those tools or you help organizations do that. But I do still see quite a bit of pushback because of the business needs, the business requirements, even from the developers that are trying to do things or want to do things securely, because they're not necessarily paid for security; they're paid for features, right?
Correct. I have not yet seen any project manager that basically gets their milestones or payments or any contractor that says, oh, if you do the most secure application, we're going to pay you extra bonus. It just doesn't happen. It's always about, like, can we get to market on time, on budget? I mean, I've seen relatively early days, actually, in the 4 to 5 days, initially, it was really difficult to actually convince people to even do static analysis. And so we had a specific bank, a fairly large one, that had probably about 3,000 developers. I mean, large for in scale of, I think, Australia. Of course, they're not the biggest, but it was very sobering for me, I think, to sit. And initially, they didn't want to adopt the tool. They didn't even know really kind of that they want to do static analysis. And so we provided it almost like a service, like a code review service. And we came in and we did that on a project that was a third-party application, and it came in kind of from a third party. The procurement team already bought that third party, so it was way too late, and they were in the final days of basically their go live was next week, and we're doing a pen test with a code review, and we're sitting down in in the meeting with the application security team, ourselves as the kind of the testers and the business unit. And essentially, we're telling them, look, guys, you honestly, like, you have some really critical stuff. From a security perspective, we would not recommend you to go live with this until you fix it. And they're sitting there saying, oh, great, but what can we do about it now? It's not even our code. It's actually a vendor's code. So we can't even, it's too late. And so I think at that point, they had a decision. Do they go live, or do they basically cancel the project or at least delay it? And when you look at the risk, yes, there's a risk from a cybersecurity point of view, but for them, if they did not go live, they would basically avoid or basically not get any revenue in the magnitude of about, I think it was like $2.5 million a day. So then you sit there and you say, well, what do we do? Do we basically stop this project, or do we go live and we take the risk? And guess what happens? Almost every single time they take the risk. And do you think they go back and fix it afterwards? Maybe, but it's going to take time. So I think that's most of the challenge that I'm seeing. So a lot of people are just taking the risk, and then it builds up later on. So yeah, but if you gave the developers and the vendors a way to do it early, I'm sure they would do it.
Well, and I mean, to be fair, right? Like, that's that is the crux, right? Like, if you gave them the time, if you gave them the incentive to do it, or not even the incentive, the time, no one wants to produce insecure code and insecure products, right? Like, most of them have quite a bit of pride in their craft, especially as you get into those senior leaders, senior developer positions. They pride themselves on what they're able to accomplish and able to produce, which is part of the reason that Ken and I always talk about, like, be careful with the language that you use when you find vulnerabilities, when you find these issues, because when you come in, hey, and you're so proud because you found a SQL injection or whatever, found a critical vulnerability in their code. Somebody's blood, sweat, and tears went into actually building that. And if they're in the room, all you're doing is you're creating a an environment that is not conducive to actually working with developers, right? Or working with those people. So, yeah,
well, essentially, you're calling their baby ugly, right?
Yeah.
So no one wants to know, no one wants to hear that. And so, I think if you give, however, exactly what you said, like what we've seen, which was really interesting. So we've had we've had actually a research around secret scanning. So in GitHub, you can apply secret scanning, and then you can basically scan your repos for any particular API keys or secrets, and you can also block it. And a relatively new feature that we introduced is called push protection, and that allows you to basically protect from any secrets coming and being pushed into your Git repo. And there's a lot of issues, obviously, with secrets in your repo, because once they're in, it's almost like an oil lick. It's very hard to get it out of the Git history, and so it becomes really difficult. And also, the question comes up around, well, what is this API key doing, and who else is using it? We can't just rotate it or revoke it. We have to figure out what else there is. And so everyone knew, though, that they shouldn't do it. A lot of developers know that they shouldn't be doing hard-coded passwords in their code. And when they were, what was interesting, though, is when we did the research and we applied push protection for customers, we saw initially that a lot of people basically circumvented it initially and didn't really kind of fix it. And so that puzzled us, because we said, like maybe before they didn't know that they're doing it, but now we're telling them that they're about to kind of introduce a hard-coded API key to their AWS, and they're still doing it. What's going on here? And so when we started asking those developers, why did they circumvent it and why did they not fix it? They just simply, most of them said that they did not know how they should actually do it in the right way. So they knew that that's not the right way, but they didn't know what is the right process. Like what is the key vault that they need to use, and what's the organization is expecting them to do. And when we added some information there, so some organizations have added information about, well, you're about to introduce a secret, but here is the way for you to build it in a safe way. Almost 80% of them fixed it at that point in time. So that was incredible. And so that proves that people will do the right thing if you you tell them, look, you're about to make a mistake. So you're not calling their baby ugly. You're telling them, hey, just so you know, you're about to swerve out of the lane. And this is, by the way, how you should do it in the right way. People will do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I know that was always the impressive thing. And, Ken, I'm talking a lot. I haven't let you ask any questions, but that was one of the things that we were always impressed by with the Netflix product security team, was the guidelines, the fact that they were enabling developers to do things in a secure manner. And it sounds like some of the new tools coming out of GitHub that you're like working with clients on, and even Ken, what you're doing over at Dry Run is more about that knowledge base of how to do things in a secure manner, and giving the developers that knowledge so that they can jump on it sooner, rather than, hey, guess what? You pushed this, this secret to, GitHub or to your Git instance, and we found it when you were deploying to production. Guess what? It's already there. Good luck, right? Like that, Yeah. I mean, I like that idea. It is this like further pushing left, concept. But with the knowledge base, not just with the vulnerability detection or secrets detection or whatever it is you're building in.
Yeah, I mean, what we see is like many people are trying to shift left. It's a new buzzword, but they're doing it in a way that just overloads the developers. They're just giving them, here's another 1,000 vulnerabilities, and here's more stuff that you need to do, instead of actually keeping it very practical. So there's really a balance to when you do the testing and what sort of information you give the developers to not overload them and keep it pragmatic for them and usable. Because you give them too much information that is not usable, and they're just, again, they're going to ignore it eventually. It's going to be noise. And that, I think, is a really, really difficult problem. I think, Ken, you and I kind of talked about it, I think, a while ago before you even started Dry Run, everyone knows that you need to shift left, then there's a lot of economical reason why you should do it, and then less rework. I don't need to explain people why they should do that. But often they're saying, well, cool, but what happens is shifting left doesn't mean you have to throw all these like cool results on the developers and then expect them to kind of do magic with it, because you're overloading them, and you forget that, again, their main priority is get features out the door on time. So the question is, how do you manage it like the right way? And I think for almost 10 to 12 years, things haven't changed, to be honest. Like if you look at the first quadrant again, where Fortify was the only one there, maybe there was Ounce Labs actually was kind of the second one there. And then they were bought by IBM, Fortify was bought by HP. But largely, there was a lot of talk about developer first application security tools, but talk is cheap. It's not as easy to do, and so largely we haven't really changed much, apart from the fact that the velocity of development has increased. So that became obviously another add-on on top of it. But I think one of the other things that I wanted to kind of mention is around the challenges. So I still think that the biggest challenges is still around kind of, people in terms of like the goals of the different goals of security and engineering, and also the amount, how do you scale the knowledge? But then from a tooling perspective, the biggest challenge that we see, I guess, three challenges. And in fact, you can apply those challenges to almost any other cybersecurity domain, whether it is SOC, whether it is DLP, whether it is network security. There's really three things that I've seen kind of in the last probably 13 years almost, where one, just customers often tend to buy more tools and then try and figure out how to kind of integrate it. And so they spend a lot of effort and time on integrating all these tools and making sense out of them. And then the people that need to use it have to go through multiple tools, and they have to go through multiple dashboards. And so that just becomes very difficult for people. Like the user experience is very difficult. And so, again, that reduces the chance of people even acting on the information you give them. And the second one is that if you think about almost every single security tool out there, whether it's, again, your SIEM, your DLP, etc., all of them, they raise a lot of alerts. It's kind of like telling you, hey, you have a headache, you have another headache, you have another headache, but not giving you, any kind of aspirin or something like that to alleviate it. And so I think a lot of the security tools have to start focusing on, rather than just telling you that you have a headache, to helping you remediate it. And I see a lot of changes in the tools nowadays, and a lot of focus on that to help people remediate stuff, as opposed to just telling you that you have a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nice
speaking my language.
Yeah. I know that was always a big complaint that we had with even the static analysis tools, but a lot of even like pen testing reports, like code review reports, whatever it was, right? Like vulnerability finding reports, was the recommendations were always so generic. And if like even nowadays, if you look at what comes out of DAS, like any of the static or the dynamic scanners, it is so generic as far as like, hey, from a code perspective, you need to, you need to do input validation and, HTML code checks or whatever it is for cross-site scripting, but it's not like very specific to, it's not helpful to a developer. It's a headache that they have to go then follow and figure out how they implement that in the framework, in the language that they're currently using, with the specific versions. And there's no guidelines that are out there presented by the tools in general, right? But Ken, that article that you just posted is pretty apropos, I guess, to that sort of a discussion, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some key points in it that I think, the key major takeaway that I like from this is like why good enough might be better than perfect. And the things that, they talk about hard-coded secrets in source code, by the way. But I think like really the things that matter and really hit on some of the things you're talking about are developer ease of use. So that's like an easier product integration. So like I think of those as actually somewhat of the same, right? Being integrated into where they work, similar to how, I mean, not similar, like GitHub Advanced Security is a perfect example of that. Building tooling into the actual product that developers are living in all day long. So that's great. Automating and orchestrating security tooling in the SDLC. Absolutely. I think that's one of the, we've talked about it a lot lately, but I think one of the hardest things is like, yeah, you put an app online, it goes through a review, and then what happens after that? Like it's not an SDLC if you don't have like an after that. If you can't measure each of your services' health based off of their security risks / other risks, that's not an SDLC. And then the last point is probably the most important one here, which is assisting with vulnerability remediation. And I 100% agree with you, Shlomi. As we've been talking to customers, one of the things we built, I can't even talk about some of it. I really want to. Soon I will be able to. But one of the things we kept coming across with people was a situation where, they're like, well, great, it's going to produce noise and someone's got to do something about it. At scale, how does that work? So then we had to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make that work. There is a way to make that work. But ultimately, it comes down to exactly what you said in the very beginning of the podcast, knowledge sharing. That's really all it is now. I wish I could get into more there, but I think that knowledge, capturing the depth and breadth of knowledge the AppSec community has, and then being able to supply that back is to help actually get those things remediated without having to lean on your security team. Like that's where it's at. So anyways, everything you're saying is music to my ears. I think it's realistic. And also I just want to go back to that, why good enough might be better than perfect. I've had this conversation with a lot of people. Static analysis tools, no matter how great they are, they're not perfect and they're rarely very accurate. And dynamic is the same, right? Like you might get lucky, you might have some good results. Most of the time though, it's not perfect. Not most of the time, I mean, it's never perfect. I think the closest we ever saw was Brakeman. And there was a very good reason why Brakeman was accurate. But even then, not perfect, right? So what do you do then? I think you focus on the good enough, those things that are like the important bullet points that are actual pain points for people every single day and what they do. Which I'm going to hand it back over to you, Shlomi, because I think that's kind of what you've been trying to preach or evangelize or however you want to say it to folks about about not just GitHub Advanced Security, but like how to run an efficient development process in a secure manner.
Yeah, and I think it's basically it's knowledge sharing. So think about it this way, like really, if I kind of make, I guess, I'm trying to kind of like maybe find or quantify the essence of the problem here, is that we really need to try and find a way with the tooling to move from just overloading people with a lot of information at the wrong time to the wrong people to going and changing that to a point where we can get fairly good signal to noise ratio and get that signal to the right people at the right time. And I think that is kind of like the crux of, I think, the problem here. And we're seeing a lot of kind of people are saying, well, like, for example, when I talk to a lot of customers, and I can see straight away, like from the first conversation that we have, if they go and ask me like, okay, well, tell me how many vulnerabilities can you find and how many, like how many frameworks and how many languages and all this kind of stuff, it's often starting at that. But the ones that are more mature are not starting with like, okay, well, we want to make sure that you can find all the vulnerabilities. They focus more on the user experience. Like, how is the process going to work? When you find something, how do we validate that it's a real thing and it's not, just noise? And then how do we bring it to the developers at the right time and allow the security and the developers to collaborate and communicate more effectively? That really is kind of more important. And then if we can even give them information or even remediate it for them automatically via introducing, certain libraries that they should use upfront instead of actually fixing it after the fact, then we are actually really making it a lot easier, because we're not expecting the developer to do the heavy lifting. We're doing the heavy lifting for them, and we're giving them the information to do. So we're making it easy for them to do that. I think that's really important. And one thing that I will say, I think as an application security professional, or even, to be honest, even as a general security professional, we always focus on, sometimes, that not always, but a lot of people kind of figured it out recently, but at least in the early days, the focus was on the technology. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but I think a lot of the work is about how do we communicate, like the communication skills. How do we sell it back to the business? How do we talk to people so that we don't tell them that their baby is ugly, but we kind of help them really realize what the implications are and what are the basically, ultimately, it's their choice. Like, as a security person, I can only recommend what you should do, but I'm not going to change it for you. And if you decide to take the risk because it makes business sense, go for it. But these are the consequences, and these are the trade-offs. But often when you talk to people like that and you give them that kind of information, then they'll ask, okay, well, what would you recommend? And then we need to give them kind of actionable stuff that will help them remediate it.
Yeah. I mean, this has come up multiple times, actually, within the last couple of weeks, in my like day job, right? What is the fact that we've got a lot of tech. I run into a lot of companies that have tech in place for static analysis, for dynamic scanning, for whatever it is that they're actually doing, but they don't have the other pillars that they need to actually consume that, right? So to introduce that, security team implements something, but they're not passing it off to the developers, or they are in a manner that the developers don't understand what it is, to go back to that point. But it always comes down to this idea of people, process, and then technology. And for some reason, we have this inherent need in the security space to jump on technology first without figuring out what the process and the people are that need to be involved. The good organizations start with that in place, mature organizations. I shouldn't say good organizations, right? But the mature organizations realize that if you don't have the people and process in place, it doesn't matter what that technology is and how good it is, because it's never going to make it into the cycle of the release and being able to improve the security of a product, right?
Yeah, I think, look, it's, even before I started with application security, when I was in like more software testing, so I was at a company called Mercury that was, again, bought by HP. I seem to be acquired by HP twice already. But even in software testing, it was the same thing. Like, initially, if you look at the market, and around circa 99, 2000, I'm really going back, kind of, you can see probably my
Don't worry, I make fun of Seth all the time for him being 87 years old. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. You're probably coloring your beard, Ken.
I've got white in it, but I'm not zoomed in enough for you to see it.
Yeah.
So even then, if you look at the Magic Quadrant in about 2000, I think, or even 2002, for software testing tools, quality, not security, there was a Magic Quadrant, again, Gartner. And whether you follow Gartner or not, I think a lot of people kind of nowadays less, especially in AppSec, I think follow it less. But it still is a representation of the old kind of mentality. And if you look at the Gartner quadrant for regular software testing, initially was application quality testing or something like this, or automated testing. I can't remember, whatever the Magic Quadrant was. It was focusing on just the testing element. And then at some point, I think 2004, as the industry matured, even the analysts kind of figured out, wait a second, the testing side is important, but that's not the only thing that we need. And so they expanded that Magic Quadrant to application lifecycle management. Like, and that means how do you manage the requirements through the testing, through the production? How do you verify in production that the application still does what it does, and manage that whole process? And a lot of people are starting to think about observability and like regular software testing. I know we're kind of moving a little bit out of security, but I think I'm really seeing the security testing kind of following almost the same path as right now. It's interesting to see that if you go to Gartner, there's a application security testing Magic Quadrant, and they still publish it. And to be honest, nothing really changed on it other than some vendors moving from here to there, but it still focuses on the how many tools can we run, DAST, RASP, IAST, SAST against how many languages we have. And that is the way that they actually measure those tools in that quadrant. And maybe that's a fair assessment for someone who's doing professional security testing, like a pen tester that needs that coverage. But then again, that's not really a real good measure of are those tools good for you? Because again, the biggest issue is communication. We talked about it. It's the process and people. How do you then communicate all these? Even if you found the best result through those scanners, how do you communicate it to the developers, and how do you keep track on that, and how do you manage that communication? That's really important. And so I honestly think that at some point in time, they're probably going to merge that Magic Quadrant with the DevOps Magic Quadrant, which is more kind of, think about it like from security testing to how do you do application security engineering. And that's a different practice. And yet you can have security testers doing their own thing, and they will still need to use Burp and other tools to verify that nothing kind of goes through the crack from an assurance point of view. But you need to meet the developers where they are at, which is in the platforms. And of course, that's self-serving a little bit for me, but I am seeing a lot of customers are saying, you know what, yeah, good enough is better than trying to find a perfect scanner if it's disconnected, and then I need to bring it in, and then it throws a lot of issues on me, etc. That's what I'm kind of seeing. And whether you're on, to be honest, whether you're on GitHub or, and that's another thing that is interesting, we recently took the same kind of approach in the Azure DevOps area. So I don't know if a lot of people know, but
ADO.
So GitHub obviously is part of Microsoft, and in the ADO world, there hasn't really been a lot of development in general on the platform. But what we've seen, so a lot of customers were like, well, if I'm on ADO, Microsoft and GitHub, I guess, were trying to say, look, the North Star is really GitHub. But then you have a lot of customers that are on ADO. That's their platform. They're not going to move because that's
we have some of the viewers that are definitely on ADO for what it's worth.
And for very good reasons. There could be data sovereignty. There could be just moving the pipelines is not really, not really kind of viable, or the whole ecosystem is on Azure. And so it actually makes sense for them to stay on ADO. And then if they needed application security, they had to go somewhere else to do that. And so we took the same tools that we have, or similar tools, like from a secret scanning and code scanning and dependencies, and we brought them natively into the Microsoft ecosystem. And it's early days, I have to say. It needs still a lot of work. It's still in public beta, but I've had maybe about 100 discussions with different customers of ADO, at least in this region, especially in government, at least in this area. And everyone's excited. Everyone's saying, like, yeah, we don't want to manage our own tools. And here I can just click on a button and it will start getting me some results. That's great. So I think there's a lot of interest to get, it might not be the best scanning, but I'm happy with just sorting out kind of the basic stuff. And that will get me into a much better risk posture.
I wanted to address a couple things. So going back to the Magic Quadrant, you had mentioned that, typically, unless you're a consultant, you won't see a ton of languages. I think there are scenarios that's not sure if you're a practitioner, but there's a problem still. So even if maybe your company does have a lot of different tech stacks and languages, which those companies exist, those companies are usually the ones that are by the time everybody's started to use Node.js, they're already on to say something different. I don't know. We'll just throw something out, Rust, whatever it might be. And while people are migrating off to Rust, they're off to the next thing. That's the real issue too. There is that those tools aren't set up to just. You have to have people that do all the research and build all the rule packs, and you have to configure the tune and configure the tooling for whatever that new tech stack is. So I'm just kind of agreeing with you and adding, there's also this scenario that occurs pretty often, or at least enough that I've heard about or seen myself. And it's pretty much the bane. And I think SemGrep has done, I'll give credit to SemGrep here. I think they've done a good job in trying to be somewhat agnostic. They cover a lot of different language stacks. That's not necessarily the point, but I do agree with you that quadrant. And actually, I'm trying to set up a poll right now. This is my other point I wanted to mention to you. I'm actually trying to set up a poll right now to see who in our Slack, like what percentage of people actually do pay attention to Gartner and the Magic Quadrant, because I actually am curious. Like, I don't know if people generally care about it. I know I never have, not once.
I would love to see people like that. I can tell you now, even as a vendor, to be honest, like initially, like in my early days, of course, I think that also in like early 2000, like Gartner was the thing, and everyone looked at the Magic Quadrant with like, yeah, I need to see it. And now, I mean, in application security, literally, I can pull out the 2009 one and this one, and it hasn't changed much. It has changed a little bit. Maybe 2009 to 2010, they moved it from static analysis Magic Quadrant to application security testing. But there's nothing really new in it. And when I ask customers, I've had, I think, one that told me, yeah, if you guys are not on the leaders quadrant, I can't kind of look at you. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you're not the right customer for me, because if you're trying to tick the boxes, that's fine. But what do you care about? Like, what's important to you? And so, yeah, it'd be really interesting to see if a lot of your viewers are looking at Gartner or not. I'd be really keen to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it might be interesting, Ken, to expand it out from that, right? Like, okay, are you paying attention to it, and are there others in your organization that are, right? Because as practitioners, we have a tendency to want to bake off things ourselves, and like, hey, does this fit for the environment that I'm in as a consultant or as a ProdSec engineer or whatever it is? So I don't necessarily refer to those like magical quadrants or whatever, like what's coming from Gartner. But there are usually others in the organization that are driven more by that sort of independent analysis, right? Executives. I mean, how many times have you seen a tool pulled in because they read about it and, whatever recent Gartner report, and hey, this is what we should be using because Gartner says it's up and coming, right? So it'd be interesting to see who's affected by it versus who's actually watching it. That's all.
All right.
As Ken builds it out. Yeah, right now.
Yeah, I'm literally building it out right now, so I'm curious. I'll keep it open. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. I'll be honest, like as a consultant, I run across it here and there, but it really doesn't affect my day-to-day that much, right?
I mean, there's some good information there, but if you're making the decision based on like, is this vendor in this quadrant or not, I think that's a problem. And the other thing is, I really think that it's time for the industry also to think like, is application security testing the most important thing, or do you want to push your platform vendors to bake in more security features early to give the engineers kind of the tools that they need? And I honestly think we need to, I mean, I know GitHub is putting a tremendous amount, and now Microsoft as well, putting a tremendous amount of work towards adding more security features. And we are constantly rethinking how to actually model it, how to price it, how to kind of structure it. And so whatever we're doing now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue. But as an example, can I say that Dependabot is the best SCA tool in the world? No, but it's free with the platform. And so if you have nothing else, turn it on.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be better than doing nothing. And so I'd say, like, you're getting it with the platform. Why would you not use it if you don't have anything else? Now, if you tried it and it doesn't meet your needs because, I don't know, whatever, it's too chatty or too much problems, or you want to look at it kind of in a different way, that's fine. Add another tool if you think you need kind of a better option. But now you don't really need to, like, if it does 80% of it, is it actually worth you focusing on trying to get another tool and integrating it and then confusing your developers because you're giving them another experience and another dashboard, that's the issue.
Yep. Well, and I mean, to your point, right? Like I've had those discussions with clients that I work with on, hey, do we really we're all in on GitHub and Dependapod is already reporting us this, like, do we need to go out and get a Sneak or another SCA tool to actually analyze these vulnerabilities? And that's the discussion that we have is it worth the effort? Not only just like the cost of the tool, in addition to, you've already paid for the GitHub platform, but is it worth the effort that's going to take to build something else into it? Or should you take those funds and apply them somewhere else, right? Because it's not always just that base cost of what it is that you're paying for. It's also engineering effort. It's time to maintain. It's time to integrate. It's the whole ability there. So I like the idea of doing away. I mean, honestly, like for years, I've been saying that penetration testers are just glorified QA testers, right? And for some reason, like they're better paid. They're very specialized in what they do. But, and Ken's heard this multiple times from me, but realistically, they probably are worse at their job as a QA tester than most QA testing agencies or QA testers actually are, because they're trained to actually do a full scope test and whatever. Okay. So now I'm on a soapbox, but on the flip side, right? Like that's where it goes to is we focused this like whole quadrant on application security testing when that should be baked into other products that we already use or other organizations or other tools, right? Like, why do I have a specific QA test tool for security when I could just take my security payloads and put them into this QA tool like, JRunner or whatever it is, and actually get the same input and the same output for everything that I've already supported and I've already built.
I think what kind of I'm not working for Gartner or to be honest, I don't really know that a lot of people are kind of looking at it, but I think the category, if you take a step back, shouldn't be just the application security testing tool, but it's application security engineering. How do you do it from the start all the way to, and Ken said it really well, like how do you actually get it into production? Like in production, how do you validate that your applications are still maintained and running well and are in a good state, and and taking that information back into the development stream from that point of view is actually going to be really important. As an example, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and it's not an easy one to do, but think about it this way: like when you run static analysis, you find all the issues in an application, and now you have a list of things. The question is, and some of them may be more critical than others, but there's still, it's information that you can, if you have unlimited time and money and effort, you can address all of them, but that's not the case. If you have limited time and money, you need to prioritize which one is the really, really important ones to focus on. And so how do you prioritize it? Well, really the priority should be based on likelihood and impact on the application in production. And so imagine we could bring information from a running application in production. I mean, ideally, we obviously sort it out before it even gets to production. But the reality is that we almost always have, unless you're building a brand new application, you're a brand new startup, like Kenny can probably do it in his one. But most organizations have already kind of a brownfield of applications that are already running in production. And so the question is, can you actually scan those in production, see what's reachable, and then bring that context back to the developers so that they know how to, or even to the AppSec team, so that they know how to prioritize and then give it to the developers in the right way. And I think that would be pretty cool, maybe based on, if you have a microsegmentation policy for applications and you know which applications are deployed where, and what's reachable, and you can bring it back to development, that could be pretty cool, I think, to help with prioritization.
Yeah, especially in a distributed architecture for sure. Like that kind of stuff would be very, very valuable. It's always kind of a difficult one, is tying the two worlds together. But yeah, I agree. That's very nice. And I did post in a link here, kind of as an aside. You guys had mentioned kind of unit testing and security focused kind of testing in general. That's what this new thing that's out, Cherry Bomb, helps with. So if listeners want to try it, yeah, it was it's pretty new. I think. Yeah.
Pretty new.
It looks pretty new.
Awesome.
API specifications written in Rust. Sweet.
Yeah, see, I told you. Everybody moves on to something new soon enough.
Everything old is new, or everything old is new again, right? Yeah.
So when you interface with people, Shlomi, like, is it a mixture of you talking to developers, talking to C-suite, talking to practitioners? Like, who's your what's the breakdown for? And then as a follow-up, what are their main kind of complaints these days about not just tooling, but just their job in relation to security?
It's a good question. We can do probably an episode just on that. But generally speaking, think about it this way. Like, I guess when we're in GitHub, we naturally start talking to. I think it just happens just because that's how it is. We tend to usually talk to the platform owners, like to the people in the organization that own the GitHub platform. Like all the admin of it, etc. And they may or may not, generally, they're not the ones who are responsible for either the engineering side or the security side. And so often, I think when I joined, sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're kind of like the people that water and feed the platform. They look after kind of like the user onboarding and the configuration in the platform. And yes, they are interacting with both of them, but often they kind of look after the platform itself. And so I think often they are the proxy, though, for all the kind of requests. So engineering teams, different engineering teams kind of will go to them and will ask them questions about it. And also the security teams will go and kind of interact with them. And so often they're the best place for us to start with the discussion. But often they don't really know kind of that. They don't do the day-to-day application security challenges. And so it's really important. And when I work with my colleagues, it's really important for us to kind of ask those platform owners to connect us also to the engineering team and the AppSec teams together. And it's almost like my job is almost 100% marriage counseling. It's being able to together and start talking. Look, I'm not talking about every organization. Some are doing it amazingly well. But I think in a more traditional finance and banking and the more regulated ones that have done it for a while, and I think they need a lot more help on the counseling side. But often when we bring them in, the challenge is like the engineering team often says, look, we just have like too many tools. It's too many results, and it's just too different. And the information that we get often is pretty much false positives. So what they're saying, in other words, is like we lost confidence that what we're getting is really actionable. Mm-hmm. And then when we're talking to the security team, they're like, well, like whatever we're doing, it's really difficult, and the engineers don't really adopt it, and we're trying to do this, and it varies. It depends really a little bit about the maturity of the security team. The more mature ones know that they have to be working with the developers, almost like more carrot than stick. And the ones that are less mature are focusing on the stick rather than the carrot. And so I think that's kind of really interesting to see. And I mean, when you talk to the executives, generally it's about speed to market. Like, how do we, get applications faster to market with less friction? That's basically the bottom line. So that's kind of the conversation there. And one really interesting kind of area that now brings all of them together is we've had some incredible kind of success and also interest around GitHub Copilot. And I think there's now a lot more other options out in the market to do kind of AI pair programming. And I think we talked about it a little bit last time. That's a really interesting conversation, because now what I'm seeing is a lot of customers are asking us, well, if you guys are suggesting blocks of code or how to build unit test cases, like if this tool can help build my unit test cases or document my code, well, what are the opportunities here to also become almost like a security AI pair programmer, like someone that will basically, you are my security assistant. So instead of an AppSec engineer telling me to do the basic stuff, what if my coding helper can help me kind of do stuff the right way? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we are working. I can tell you now, there's quite a few projects in that side at GitHub. But just to give you an idea, like in GitHub Copilot, we pretty much really released the early kind of innings or the early stuff into it. For example, looking at hard-coded passwords. So if Copilot, while you're writing, can find hard-coded password and then tell you before, or even suggest ways on how to do your authentication authorization the right way, that's a win. It's not, okay, it's not going to solve everything, but it means that as an AppSec engineer, I don't need to worry about every single small thing. I have a way to scale my knowledge out to the engineers. So I think there's a lot of interest, and I think a lot of potential there. We're not there yet, by no means.
Also, that is in line with going back to one of the very first things you said, is that, you know, training for developers and scaling that all out is not going great. Something like that is actually great training. It's literally pair programming, like alongside you as you're writing code. So that is the best training in a real scenario. Anyways, so just that's interesting. So that was my takeaway.
And training, that's the other thing. Like what I'm seeing is with training, a lot of customers like have tried the general programs where they kind of onboarded developers and then they have to go through this whole series of training, and that's or maybe the gamified platforms or those kind of things, and they're important. There's definitely a role there, but the question is like, how much knowledge do you retain after you've done that? You probably retain some of it, but really the best time to learn for people is when they actually do some mistake and then they get that notification at that point in time, which is relevant, not just bullshit. And so I think that's, like the lot of the customers have asked us, is there a way to almost like think about like teachable moments where when you actually make the mistake, you can learn more about that mistake at that point in time when it's relevant, it's interesting for you, you're not moving on to the next thing. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I don't think it's going to replace the general training that you do. And especially one thing that is really, really interesting, I was actually speaking to Cole Conford from Gala, and I know, Kenny, you talked to him, and we were just chatting about it. And one of the things that we're seeing is that customers are being more put off by the general high-level platforms that do training, and they want to do in-house training that is more interesting. It's interesting. It's kind of like went full circle.
Yeah, full circle.
And now people are finding a lot more value when they can sit around with experts like yourselves and see, hear the practical stuff and ideally face-to-face, but even if not, it's more tailored to them. They can talk about it. It's a lot more engaging and it's a lot more interesting. So I think something like this, plus maybe the AI pair programmers to bring in the kind of the more mundane, boring stuff at the right time, I think is really, really interesting.
I know a couple people who do training.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and to that point,
that is really funny.
Yeah. And to that point, Shlomi, like we've been seeing more interest on the training side as a consultant, right? Where we do customized, right? Like, oh, you're having problems with XSS or whatever, or authorization. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to talk about the specific framework language that you're using, the patterns that you've developed internally, and have that discussion on what we found in your assessments with like actually the developers to give them that that background and that knowledge base. So you're absolutely right. Like I like the convergence of what is happening with the AI, with the expert opinions, and yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to grow from there. Along those lines, though, before we go too much further, we have been talking for an hour again. These go by so quickly, right? Shlomi, where can people find you online? What are your plans coming up? If they want to continue the conversation with you, and then we're going to have to do a follow-up yet again to talk about, more of this. But yeah, where can they find you?
Awesome. So I guess the more from a more professional side for the ones who are in the corporate, obviously I'm on LinkedIn, but I think that probably the easiest way for the listeners on this podcast is to reach out to me on the Slack. I'm on the Slack in Absolute AppSec. I love that place. I'm on Twitter, or I guess now it's X. I will always call it Twitter for some reason.
Yeah.
I love that, but I'll kind of more look at things like trading and investment generally kind of on Twitter, less the security side, but I do follow quite a few people there. But yeah, I'd most likely love to kind of talk about AppSec. I think to me, it's one of the most interesting areas in general in IT and specifically in security. I've done a lot of other stuff, and that's something that I'm pretty passionate about.
Yeah, obviously, right? Like, I mean, honestly, it feels like we're just sitting around having drinks and talking about what we're seeing in the industry, which is great, right? Like that's the whole point of what we're doing here. But it does feel like we barely scratched the surface, and it's been an hour, right, Ken?
Yes, it has. Yes. It always goes super fast. I try to tell people that. Speeds by. But anyways, great company.
This is the value of like your podcast is just amazing. Like it's just such a good medium for just general conversations that are not like baked in. Like it's not that we haven't even talked 2 minutes before we got online. We're like, hey guys, how you doing? Like we haven't actually prepared or did like what do we want to talk about, right? It just came, I think, pretty natural.
First of all, thank you for telling us how great we are. We will accept any compliments people want to give us. But jokes aside, we did try to do at the beginning a little bit more scripted of a thing, and it's just so forced and it's not fun, and we'd rather just keep it organic.
Yep. Well, good. Any last minute thoughts before we go ahead and close this out for today or for this episode, and then we'll work on scheduling the next one. Shlomi, any final thoughts? Advice?
There's a lot of. I think we talked about it last time. This is a marathon. That's the thing. Like there's no end goal for AppSec, and so I think it's a tough role. It's a tough job, and the burnout can happen there. I've seen quite a lot of people after 3-4 years having a burnout, but I think it's honestly one of the most important areas kind of in the market. And if there's something that kind of can be pretty positive, think about it this way. So if you think about the market in security market is estimated about 2 trillion kind of potential. That's by McKinsey. AppSec, according to Forrester, is about 6 billion now, but it's scheduled to, the market itself is looking to grow to about 13 billion. So I think the opportunity for practitioners, and that's in the next 2 years, it's actually the fastest subcategory in security, fastest growing subcategory in security in the next 2 years. And so there's a lot of effort on it. There's a lot of focus on it. And I think for a lot of years, in fact, probably 10 to 12 years, it's just kind of been living in the shadow. It's been a lot more interesting to do, I don't know, phishing attacks because everyone thought about it, or ransomware, or, digital forensic stuff. But I think now it's going to be super, super important. And the market is actually starting to grow at the fastest rate. So people that have stuck it out, I think are going to get, they're going to be paid some dividends, and it's going to be a really high demand area to be. And I can't see how engineers are not going to be able to not do it. So I think that there's a lot of interest in that space. That was a lot of last minute words, but that's from me.
Yeah, nope, that's great. Yeah, we appreciate it. We appreciate you taking the time. Thanks to the listeners that stuck with us for a off hours or off normal schedule event. But yeah, find us online. Join us next week for the CTF. And Ken, any final thoughts, things that you wanted to bring up?
I am going to pin that poll, if I can here, into our Slack. And on Tuesday, when we reconvene for our regularly scheduled episode, we'll cover the results.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Shlomi. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And we will see you all online.
Thank you, guys. See you.